one thing to bring up before we start all of this. One of the most important things to keep in mind when you're going to be color correcting, and I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of this, you have to calibrate whatever screen that you're on. As it is, this screen's not calibrated. I have no clue what we're going to be seeing here or there. So that makes a tricky point. Like, how do you color correct something when you don't know what your screens are actually showing you? You can't trust your eyes to show you the right thing when your screen's just randomly spitting something out. Even if you go buy a really nice screen that came factory calibrated, it still needs to be recalibrated once you get it. What with a, well, depends on what you can afford. Probably a colorimeter. Ideally, you'd get a spectroradiometer to profile the screen, and then you can use that to get really accurate calibration. One that I would recommend, let's see if my internet will work, is an X-Rite i1 Display Pro. Don't know if this will pull anything up. There's a lot of options out there. There's Color Monkey, there's Spider. This one really is not that much. It's $240. That's not breaking the bank. I would highly recommend that you either get this, or you can, if you got a little bit more money to throw at it, you can step up to a it's called the S9 by SpectroCal. Or C6? There we go. This guy. This is actually the same colorimeter as the i1 Display Pro, but X-Rite sent it to this company SpectroCal, which is one of the world's best color calibrating, monitor calibrating. They make some of the best software out there. And so they took that colorimeter and just essentially made it better. But a what? Oh yeah. X-Rite. Yeah, R-I-T-E. X-Rite i1 Display Pro. This one's obviously a little bit more expensive. It's nice, but you'll do just fine with the X-Rite i1 Display Pro in most cases. That's what I use personally, and I'm getting by just fine with that. So, like I said, this screen's not calibrated, so I don't entirely know what it's going to be showing us today, but I don't have to deliver anything that we're working on today to a client, so for all intents and purposes, you'll still be able to see all the tools and see how it all works. So with that aside, one other small thing, I'm actually recording this screen as I'm doing it and just using the mic on my laptop. I was hoping to do a little bit more, but I ran out of time. So a friend of mine who lives in Arizona was ideally wanting to come or to get a copy of this, so I'm doing this for him. But if all goes well with the recording, then I'll post that on the group too, so that you guys can have a copy of that. Hopefully I give you guys useful information that you would want a copy of that for. Well, I guess we'll see how things go. Okay. I guess first question before we really start digging into it, is there anyone who is not using Lumetri?
Not using what?
Not using Lumetri color at all? Okay. What do you guys use?
Well, I'm not using anything.
Oh, you're not using anything. Well then.
I just did my first video recently.
Oh, okay.
I'm about to.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, I hope I give you lots of good info. You're gonna get a lot coming from not very familiar with it. But cool. Next question: how many of you will use more than one Lumetri layer on a video? Okay. Use more than one Lumetri layer. There's so much that you can do with these videos or with Lumetri. It's absolutely incredible. Keep in mind though, as you start adding Lumetri layers, you are making it so much harder to process all of that. So that gets complicated. For me at UCSD, I have a fully loaded Mac Pro. It's got the 12 cores, 64 gigs of VRAM. We shoot on an FS7 in 4K with 10-bit 422. And for me, once I start throwing a handful of different Lumetri layers and HSL secondaries on there, then I have to start stopping down to, if you're looking over here, from full res down to half, quarter. Sometimes I'll even run down to eighth if I have a lot that's going on there. So that's something that you'll just have to keep in mind depending on the quality of the footage that you're working through, how many stacks of Lumetri you're going to put on there, and the processing power of your computer. Oh yeah, I'll get to this later, but let me disable that.
Is it very important, even if that it be at its highest quality, or will you still be able to get the job done if it's not?
Oh yeah, this is the playback quality, the quarter, half, eighth. That's just playback quality. That's just that's not render quality.
But it won't be able to. It's not crucial to use just for color correction. Like you don't have to have it at full highest quality to do the best color correction for you. Or do you recommend?
Well, when you pause it, it goes to full.
Yeah.
So you can do your color correction. When you play it, you're fine. When you pause it, it goes full.
So yeah, you can see it like right now, it looks perfectly clean. I'm on an 8th. As soon as I hit play, then you can see it gets terrible.
That's it.
Okay.
So when you're paused, it is full quality. Sometimes you can get by with lower quality, but you do want to at least verify. Go to full quality. Try to play back to try to verify some things. You can try rendering out a section just within Premiere, and that'll kind of help you. Question?
Yeah, I don't know if we discussed it, but trying to get internet access here, so I can.
Oh yeah.
It says guest.
Oh, the guest didn't work for me. I don't know. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were
That's good enough.
famously unable to get Wi-Fi here. So.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, as a bit of an example, this I have all the effects disabled because I don't want to show you guys. I'll get to that later. But just as an example, I have, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 layers of Lumetri, all working on this clip at the same time.
Are you gonna tell us what, like, because why wouldn't you just make those tweaks all on one layer?
I will get into that, but the main reason is like some things like white balance or temperature or tint. You don't need to have multiple layers doing temperature and tint. You do for HSL secondaries. You can only have one secondary layer, which I'll get into that pretty soon. Just wanted to get a quick poll of everyone. So from the beginning, I'm going to just kind of briefly go over all the tools within Lumetri, a little bit of how they work, a little bit of my opinion about them as well. Then I'll start getting into the color correcting side of things and working with mixed color footage to be able to get the result that you want to have. So I'm going to park it over here on this clip. So we've got a couple things going on. Yeah, that's big enough. One thing that you'll always want to have up while you're color correcting things are your scopes. This is critically important. I mentioned earlier that you have to calibrate your screen in order to know what you're getting out of your screen. But even then, screens aren't perfect and your eyes aren't perfect. Your eyes are constantly adjusting. Your eyes constantly white balance to things. So you can't fully rely on your eyes. You can't fully rely on your screens. But you can rely on scopes. They're giving you an accurate pixel readout of what everything is. So there are a lot of different options out there. You've got your waveform, parade, histogram, and 2 vector scopes. These are the 2 that I pretty much always stick to. Waveform and a vector scope, YUV. Couple things about them with the waveform. The way I have it set up right now is this is an RGB waveform. So it takes the red, green, and blue values for every pixel and plots them on here. If you're not familiar with how this works, basically the up and down axis is intensity, how bright each individual pixel is. The right and left corresponds to the right and left in the actual frame, and then there's the red, green, and blue channels. You can go over and change this to Luma, and so it's just showing you just Luma values, no chroma values, so no color, which can be useful for gauging things. It is a little bit more accurate for Luma than RGB, but me personally, I usually just stick with RGB. So over here on the vector scope, the way this works is it's taking every single pixel in this entire frame and it's plotting it based off of its saturation and off of what color it is. So things that are right here in the very center of the vector scope have no saturation. That could be black, it could be white, it could be gray. It's just that there's no color information at all. As it gets further away, that indicates more saturation. So like in this example, you can see that there's a lot of these values that are going, all these things that are going to in between like cyan and blue, which kind of makes sense. Like if you look over here in the frame, you can see she's got a lot of blue here. We've got this whole window that's a little bit blown out, and so there's a lot of cyan going in there. There's even a little bit of cyan up in here, stuff through there. Then you can also see a lot coming over here to yellow, which also makes sense. You can see that there's some yellow spots down here. There's this whole fume hood thing that's a little bit yellow greenish. There's the wood back there as well. So there's a lot of lot of things that you can see the colors there. This hexagon line that you see here, it's a little bit of a rough tool, but roughly what it means, based off of the way I have it set up right now, and this is the default configuration, is that means colors that are safe within the Rec 709 color space, which we don't need to dig too far into Rec 709 or sRGB. Just know that everything that's on the web more or less needs to fit in here. So if I started pushing colors really far, oh, actually, that's not going nearly as far as I expected it to. Maybe Premiere actually might not let me push things too far. But I've got things, now I've got stuff going past the edges of that.
Clamp signal prevent it from going?
No, clamp signal is a different thing. I'll get to in a minute. You can see there's this stuff that's going past the hexagon. So some of those colors might get clipped out when you go to export because they don't fit within the Rec 709 color space. So you don't want that to happen because that means that your colors aren't going to be displayed correctly when you render things out. For the most part, for video footage or for camera footage, it's not really a big deal. This is a bigger deal for graphics. So let's say you design some graphics and they have some nice, bright, vivid colors. Well, those colors might not fit within Rec 709, so you can check them here to see roughly where it's falling, and then that you might just know that's going to get clipped out, so you need to change the color or do something, adjust it. All right, we can reset that back to beginning. Couple more things about your scopes here, and I promise we're going to be getting into the fun stuff soon of all the rest of the controls. But these scopes, like, I can't reiterate how important they are for you to be able to color correct things accurately. The clamp signal, what that is that takes any values that, if you look in here at the waveform, you can see the 100 up here, 100 IRE, down to 0 IRE. So you can think of it like 0 intensity, it's pure black. 100 is 100 intensity, pure white. Clamp signal takes any pixels that go below 0 or above 100, and it just, in the waveform, doesn't show you what that information is. So the reason I have this clip up here is with the camera that I shot this with. This is something I shot a year or so back, where I didn't have any light control. I just had to hop in there and grab some B-roll of people. I had that window back there that was blown out, but the camera that I shot it with was an FS7, and the FS7 records what are called overbrights. So it will actually record information past 100 IRE that in post-production you can bring back. So right now you've got these highlights that are clipped back here. If I unclamp the signal, you can now see all this information that's going past 100 IRE, which if you had clamp signal turned on, you wouldn't even know that it's there. But that's half a stop, maybe a stop of extra dynamic range that the camera is giving you if you know how to get that information back. And these days there are a lot of different cameras that record these overbrights that you can just pull back all this extra information that you thought you lost. So the FS7 does it. C100 records a little bit of overbrights. There's a lot of cameras out there that are doing that these days. It can't hurt to just toss your footage in there and check that real quick. This part over here, for the most part, I can't imagine anyone's going to need to deal with that. Just keep that over on 8-bit. One other thing to talk about, if you right click here, you can go to color space. So there are 3 different options: 601, 709, and 2020. For the most part, today, everything that we're dealing with is Rec 709. That's just 709. Rec 601 is an older format for standard definition footage, but I can't imagine anyone's going to need to deal with that. Rec 2020 is something to just be familiar with. That's something that's going to be coming out, or that's going to be getting more adoption soon with HDR and I'm blinking at H.265 as well. But we've got a little bit of time before that all starts popping up. Okay, I think that covers it for the scopes. If anyone has any questions, by the way, just shout it out. Let me know.
A specific workspace for color? What's
No.
highlighted at the top there?
This was the standard editing workspace, and then I customized it to how I wanted it here today.
Ultimately, you're just editing it until it looks good to you, and while keeping it within that hexagon.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, yeah. I mean, that's kind of how everything goes. You just try to make it look as good as you can, and while keeping everything under control, so that then when you export it out, you know that you're going to have a clean copy when you export out. So, getting over to the actual Lumetri controls, I'll just start top to bottom as you see them here. So this first section is called the basic correction section. and
Which
it's
part of your workflow do you go top to bottom when you?
oh no, I'm just going top to bottom to describe it today. I mean, usually my workflow is let me get into that later. I'll go over all the controls and then I'll kind of go over my workflow for that. So going from top to bottom in here, the first thing is the input LUT. For the most part, this is not something that I ever personally use. I don't use LUTs for anything ever. There's two types of LUTs to think about. One are creative LUTs, LUTs that just style your footage in a specific way, and then there's correction LUTs. Like if you shoot something in S-Log3, it's a very flat profile. It looks like this. That's how it came out in the camera. If you shoot this in S-Log3, you can go over and put a LUT on it. I actually don't have an S-Log3 LUT with me, but this Amira LUT is actually pretty similar. And you can kind of see what that does. Lookup table. You can just think of it, it's something that modifies your video footage to look different. So sometimes you have a correction LUT, like maybe you'll apply a LUT like this to correct your footage from S-Log to something else, or it's a creative LUT to just kind of style the footage without you having to take the time to do it.
Do you use them on your field monitor?
LUTs?
Yeah.
Oh, like for a calibration LUT for a monitor?
Yeah, like a 709.
Oh, that no.
Just when you're shooting.
Oh, well, yeah. When I'm shooting, I might toss it on there. I mean, I do most of my shooting these days with an FS7, and I'm pretty familiar with what I want to get while I'm in S-Log, so I'm pretty comfortable with that. But yeah, you can toss in an S-Log LUT while you're recording on your field monitor to help you judge exposure. Although that does get a little tricky. It's just a brief tangent that I will get into further. With this shot, you can see that if you put this LUT on your footage, on your field monitor, when you were exposing, you would have said that this footage is way, way, way overexposed, completely blown out. But it's not. You take the LUT off, all that information is there. And that's something that you have to do with an FS7 when you're shooting S-Logs. You have to overexpose it, and the LUT does tricky things. For instance, put this LUT back on, everything's very overexposed. If I start trying to bring the exposure back, I'm running into problems. The skin tones just still look off. There's not a lot that I can do to try to get things back to look clean and to have the right saturation values in there. So that gets tricky. So generally, like I said, I don't use LUTs, but if you're going to use them, that's where you use them. We'll turn this guy back off. I'm going to go back over to this clip. Next thing is white balance. So you've got the little eyedropper here. It's pretty simple. Select the eyedropper, drop it on what you know is supposed to be pure white. You can click it on there, and it does a white balance that it thinks is correct based off of what you clicked on. And that can be a really handy thing. It's like if you have something in your shot that you know is a clean white, you can stick your white balance dropper on there, and you're good to go. But that can be a little bit tricky too. Say you were shooting in a mixed color environment where you have maybe you have like in here, we've got a window out here, then this is lit by fluorescent lights above, and then it's hard to see, but there's one little, you can see this little catch light in her eye. That was from a light that I had. So three different white balances essentially in this shot, and I clicked on one spot back there, which, it does make the shot look a little bit cleaner. That's a little bit green. That's a little bit nicer there, but it's not perfect. So let's go reset this back to default. Oh, that doesn't work. Going on to the next two parts, they're pretty straightforward. There's the temperature slider. Make cold, make it dark, or make it warm. Then there's the tint slider. So here there's make it green, make it pink. Here it's a bit green, so if I was doing this by hand, I'd be making this a little bit pink. Then you've got your exposure slider. It's pretty straightforward. Brings your exposure up or down. Generally, for myself, this is something that I use a little bit sparingly. I hesitate to use exposure control heavily because I just like to have full manual control of where my highlights are going, where my shadows are going, and where my midtones are going. And with this, it's just strong arming everything. It's taking all of your data signal and it's making it all of it brighter, all of it darker. And I like to do everything by hand, so that's a little bit of that. Next is contrast. That's pretty straightforward. Add contrast, decrease contrast. This is a tool that I personally don't ever use, ever. Just for the same reason as for exposure. I want to have complete control over where my shadows are going and where my highlights are going. And usually I don't want, if I want to add more contrast to a shot, I don't want to add the same amount. I don't want to push the highlights and the shadows in the same at the same amount. Maybe I want to bring the shadows down a little bit, but I want to bring my highlights up a lot, for instance. What's that? Yeah, that's actually next part. Here we've got highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And those all sound very similar. Like highlights and whites, you would think those are pretty similar. Shadows and blacks, you would think those are pretty similar. But the way that they function is different. So I'm going to go back here to clamp my signal. So as we discussed before, we know in this shot there's all this extra information up here that's just currently being displayed as clipped information. So it's gone. We don't have it. Clamp signal shows us as not being there. So if I go over here to my highlights, it'll start taking it's trying to isolate the brightest values of the image and let you adjust just the brightest values. So maybe you like where your shadows are at and you just want to, but your highlights aren't quite where you want them. You can use this to adjust that. But you can see that as I'm bringing it down, I'm not recovering any of this information that's all clipped up here. It's still gone. Now this doesn't mean that the highlight tool is bad. That's something that I use very frequently. That's just one of the big differences between the highlight tool and the whites tool. So we go over here to whites, and you can see I'm recovering all that information, which you can't do with the highlight tool. And that's awesome. I mean, it's hard. I know it's hard to see here on the projector. The projector is actually clipping more than what actually I see on my laptop. But if you were looking at my laptop right now, you would see that this is obviously clipped. There's some stuff clipped here, and I can bring it back. I guess you guys can see that a little bit here too. That this is the before. You see no information up there. After, now you're getting blinds. It's just extra dynamic range that your camera is giving you. You just have to go through the extra work to get it for some reason. I don't know why camera manufacturers do that. That's above me. But it's there.
Did you shoot this?
I did, yeah.
And were you looking at like exposure when you shot this?
Yeah, I was trying to I mean, my focus was getting a good exposure on her. The window was so bright and the room didn't have great lighting that I knew that I had to blow out the window. I mean, if I exposed this for the window, she would have been dark. Very, she would have been so far underexposed that it wouldn't have been worth it. Like
With this protection program.
Yep. If I was shooting for that. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's nice when you're shooting to be able to get a clean exposure out the window, but sometimes it's just not realistic depending on the dynamic range of your camera, the lighting that you have there. Sometimes you just have to blow it out.
So you're saying that when you play with whites, can you repeat that it gives you more information than highlights?
Yeah. I'll show you again. So, and keep an eye. You can keep an eye on here, but this is where I'd be looking right now. So you can see here in the waveform, there's all this information up here that's just being pure white. This stuff that's here that's all collecting at the 100 IRE line, that's clipped information. So if I go over here to my highlights tool and I start bringing that down, it's not bringing me back any of that information that's being clipped out of my camera. Nothing. It's bringing down the highlights that you can see in the shot right now. So it's still a good tool, but it's not giving me that information that's from the 100 IRE, above 100 IRE, as compared to whites, which now the waveform is coming way down. And you still see, as I bring it down, you still see those lines there. You don't have unlimited dynamic range. You can't just keep pulling back information forever. So there's still some stuff that's clipped, but you can get a little bit there. Shadows and blacks, that's kind of the shadows tool. That's kind of the blacks tool. Roughly the way to keep in mind the difference between the two of those is shadows starts pushing down. Like if you're looking over there at the waveform, you can see that this tool it's focused on the darkest regions, the shadows of the shot, but it's affecting the entire shot. It's bringing down skin tones. It's bringing down the cabinets in the back. You can see in the waveform, everything's getting pushed around except really like the very brightest signals up there. The black slider, much more selective there. It's almost entirely located on that bottom spectrum, like the below 20 IRE spectrum. It's not doing as much for everything else.
So when you're doing your initial pass, what IRE values you're looking for and why?
It just depends on the shot. I mean, that gets into a little bit of a tricky thing. I mean, back in the day when you were working with like SD footage and you were delivering to TVs, you had all sorts of IRE values that you were told to shoot at. Your skin tone should be 60 IRE. This should be that. It's just it's a different world today with digital video the way it is here. There often isn't an IRE value that I'm looking at. I just go for what looks nice for the shot. So here, her skin tones. Let's see where those guys are at. Over here to my effects control, opacity. I mean, her skin tones as they are right now seem fine. There's a lot that I would want to do with this shot to clean it up, but as far as what it's at right now, scopes. Oh, there we go. I'll show you in a second there. So, actually, let me go over here to Luma. So yeah, I mean, her skin tones right now are around ballpark of 70 IRE, and that can be fine. 80 IRE can be fine. 60 can be fine. It just depends on your shot and what you want it to look like. Yeah, to do what I just did, I just went over to opacity. There's these 3 tools here for making a mask, so I use the free draw tool to just draw a quick little mask, which I will get into that a little bit later because that's pretty important.
Affects that area at that point, nothing else in the shot?
It only shows you that area. So all of your Lumetri controls, they're gonna apply to the entire video. But in that case, all I wanted to see was her skin tones. I didn't want to see anything else, so I just did that mask on there and be able to quickly see out. So let's go back here. I'm gonna set this waveform back to RGB because that's how I prefer to see it. And then last thing to talk about in the basic correction tool is your saturation slider. That's straightforward. Add saturation, lower saturation. And you can see in the vector scope it's changing dynamically, changing a lot, depending on how I'm pushing things. Which, again, it illustrates how the vector scope works as plotting saturation. One last thing that I want to talk about before we go past here. A really common tool that people use to add saturation is they use the temperature slider. They'll just start adding a little bit of warmth, which gives an effect of having more saturation, but it's not. It's not the saturation tool. So that changes the white balance of your shot. So if you start pushing your temperature to warm, then you have a white balance that's too warm. So if you need to add saturation to your shot, don't use the temperature tool. Just use the saturation tool. That's what the tool is built to do. Moving on to creative. This one will be a pretty quick one. First, there's look. And here there's a whole bunch of different effects you can apply on here. You put this Kodak, some sort of film emulation look print on there. You can see that making an effect on there. So that's just a whole bunch of looks that are built in there that are they're for the most part creative styling that you can put on there if you want to. Yeah, you also can, if you go over here to custom, you can search for a LUT, just like over here with the input LUT. So you could if you're shooting footage like S-Log3 and you want to put an S-Log3 to Rec 709 LUT on this footage, you can go over here to the basic correction input LUT and toss it there, or you could put it on the creative side of things. Again, I don't really use either of those tools very often, but the way I understand them is that if when you put your LUT on the footage, it clips out part of your signal, because just the way the S-Log works is it gives you a whole bunch of dynamic range in a really squished way. When you add back all that contrast, you often lose dynamic range. With the input LUT, you can recover that. If you put your LUT on the creative side, you can't recover that. So if you're going to use a LUT to correct your footage, you want to put it on the basic correction tab, not on the creative tab. But you can go over here to the creative tab, and then you can put in all sorts of effects if you want to. And you can Google LUTs and find as many LUTs as you want. There's a million out there. Once you put a LUT on there, then you've got this intensity slider to make it more pronounced, less pronounced. Like maybe you like this look, but this is a bit too heavy-handed, so you just want it partially in there. You can do that. Let's go back and turn that off. Faded film, just kind of fades things. I don't really use that one personally. Sharpen, this one is awesome. The sharpening that they put in with Lumetri is far superior than just the standard sharpening tool that we all used to use before Lumetri came out. So if you're currently using the old sharpen tool, scrap it, stop using it. The Lumetri sharpen tool is actually pretty good. Sometimes you can push things pretty surprisingly far with the sharpening tool, and it ends up being okay. Try not to be too heavy-handed with that. Like sometimes you really want a shot to be sharper, but then if you had too much sharpness, it just looks bad. So be careful with that one. But you can push this one farther than you can push the old one. What?
Is the old sharpen tool you're talking about the unsharp mask? Or?
No. Where is my? There's effects. Go over here. I'll just. Just the sharpen tool here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you use the unsharp mask, and do you know how this stacks up against that one?
I don't use the unsharp mask. The Lumetri sharpening has always worked out great for me, so I just stick with that.
I'm mistaken. I think you started to explain how you get to Lumetri from Premiere Pro.
Mm-hmm.
Can you show that panel?
Oh, how to pull up the panel? Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry about that. So there's a couple different ways. When you open up Premiere, you should be seeing all of these different workspaces up here. I've got a whole bunch of extra stuff here just because we use this computer at UCSD, so I have like 4 color spaces because I change my mind all the time. Mark over there has a color space and all this stuff, but generally these are the ones that'll show up. If they're not showing up there, you can go over to Window, Workspaces, and there are a whole bunch of different things as well as here all the hotkeys. So you could go to the color workspace, which will have Lumetri already there. It'll have a program on it, but I guess it's giving me a source one, which I can switch over to Lumetri scopes there. You can also take a workspace that you already have, and you can move this. You can move all these windows around. You can adjust everything as much as you want to, and you can add those. So, like if you're in the standard editing workspace, which I was in the standard editing workspace, but then I've changed things around for here. You can add new windows by going to Window, and then here are all the different windows you can add. So right now we've got Lumetri Color, and that's the stuff over here on the right. And then there's Lumetri Scopes, and that's all the scopes here. So again, you can go to Window, start checking boxes here to add stuff, or you can just go to the color workspace, whatever works for you. Yeah. Then over here, once we get past sharpening, you've got a vibrance. Vibrance works a little bit different than saturation. Like you can see, it's not affecting her skin tones as much as a saturation will. They work the way that they isolate colors and or target specific colors to adjust them is just a little bit different. And then you have another saturation slider you can use. And then shadow tint, highlight tint. This is generally more of a creative thing that you can do. Like if you're not, like one of the big effects that people are doing out there is an orange and cyan look that everyone goes for. You see it on every TV show and every movie and every commercial. It's all over the place. And a quick and dirty way that you can add that, this isn't the best way, but a quick and dirty way to do that is you can take your highlights, start pushing them warm. You take your shadows, start pushing them blue. Maybe I want to push that really crazy far. And then the tint balance just pushes things in one direction or the other. So, quick and dirty way to do that. These aren't, I have to say, like this whole tab, I personally don't really do if I'm going to be like, if I want to have a creative or really stylized look to something, I do it in Resolve. There's just not a ton of like creative controls within Premiere, but this is here. Except the sharpen tool. That one is awesome. Like I said, I use that pretty frequently. Going over here to curves, you'll see 2 different types of curves here. Top curve is just your typical curve that you have in Photoshop. You've got it here. You've got in every color correction program pretty much out there. You can have it on 4 different settings. So here's just the standard Luma. Then you could do specific red curve. Actually, let me just show you with white with the Luma curves. So then you can put a point on there, and you can start dragging your footage. So the way this line works is this, like down here, when you move things down here, that adjusts your shadows. Moving things up here, adjust your highlights. Moving things here, adjust your midtones. You can see that here. I got it up here. It's mostly focusing on highlights, but it's a curve. It's not like It's not like I'm isolating only my highlights based off of the way the configuration that I have now. But it's this, as I'm pushing it towards the left side of this line, it's brightening. And as I pull it the other direction, it's darkening. If you go over here to midtones, it's doing everything. Go over here to shadows, it's mostly just working on shadows. So you can do quite a bit with this. Something that I pretty frequently use is a pretty standard S-curve, where it adds a little bit more contrast. You could do something like bring your shadows down a little bit. Actually, I can already tell you it's going to be too much. And then you bring this up. This can be, as with all these color controls, you're almost never going to get it right the second you start moving something. You just kind of got to play around and get a feel for what you want to do to get the look that you want, depending on the footage that you have. That all gets tricky. But you can see this was a quick way to add contrast, to add a little bit of contrast to the shot, so that I have nicer black levels. You can see these black levels are getting close to the bottom, which I'll get a little bit more into later. That's why that matters. Something to keep in mind though with the curves is in the way, essentially the way that they function. Get this isolated like that. You can see that as I'm pushing these highlights, right now what I just did by putting in all these dots is it's just I'm setting it up so I'm mostly just affecting the highlights. But you can see as I'm affecting the highlights, her skin tones are getting super saturated. And that's a tricky thing with curves. As you push things to the left side of that line, you're not only adding luminance values, you're adding chroma, so saturation to it as well. And sometimes that's tricky. Sometimes you want to brighten up a shot, but you don't want to add saturation. So like here, this is adding a whole bunch of saturation to your skin tones, and that's making things look weird among other things. And vice versa. So as I'm bringing it down, her skin tones are growing gray. They're not just getting darker, they're going gray. So as you pull things to the right side of that line, it's desaturating. And that's the tricky thing about curves. Like they're a great tool. They're awesome, but you don't want to be heavy-handed with them because that's affecting your saturation as well as your luminance values. And that's a tricky thing. So we'll set that back. Then you've got red, green, and blue. This isolates the red, green, and blue channels within this shot, so you can just focus on that. So I can sit here and I'm adding a lot of red. And it's adding a ton of red to the footage, but you can see that the blue shirt, because that shirt mostly only has blue in there, isn't getting affected nearly as much as some of the other parts of the image. Same thing, then there's green or blue. And this is something that I don't really use correction-wise to color correct footage, but it's something that you can use stylistically. So there's kind of like it's kind of a film-ish, I suppose, effect that you can do. You can start adding like some reds. This is going to be a little bit quick and dirty. Add a little bit of greens. Normally I'd be adding more greens, but the white balance on that shot is off. And then add some blues down here. Actually, it's not turning out well in this shot because the white balance is god-awful, which we'll get into correcting pretty soon. So let's reset this all back to default. Then going down here to the hue saturation curves. If we were in Resolve, this would be called hue versus sat, where in this circle, you get to select a specific group of colors, and you get to add saturation or remove saturation from just those colors. So maybe I really want to emphasize this blue jacket on here.
Does this have a qualifier?
A qualifier?
Does the Lumetri have a qualifier?
Oh, like an HSL qualifier?
Like Resolve.
Yeah, it does. I mean, this is kind of a bit of a qualifier. And if we go down to HSL secondaries.
Can you key it with an eyedropper?
Yes, you can. That's coming up. We'll have to get over to the HSL secondary to do really advanced qualifiers and to start keying things. This is like it's like a way to get a key on something, on a specific thing, if you only want to adjust saturation values, and it gives you kind of a clean roll on and roll off of those color values. So it's kind of a quick and dirty way. This is another one of those things that I personally don't use a ton, but I know a lot of people like it. Like for instance, you can just select this blue, and it automatically puts in little dots for you. Or if you want to do it manually, start adding your nodes here. And then I can take this, now that I have the blue selected, and I can modify them. So there's her shirt, where I'm desaturating her shirt. And it's not getting everything. It's just focused on her shirt. And so you can do lots of really cool things with that. You could go over here, if you just want to do some quick and dirty white balance, this isn't the most accurate way to do it, but one of the white balance issues with this shot, and that's a little bit hard to see with the projector, is this fume hood. The lighting in that fume hood is pretty crappy lighting. Some kind of really awful fluorescent lighting is my guess. So there's a lot of green in there. So I can go over here. It's kind of a greenish yellow. So I can go over here, and I'm going to kind of select this range in between kind of greens and yellows, and I can start bringing it back. And then now the white balance on that fume hood is not as bad. It's not perfect though. The way that I just did this is far from a perfect selection. You can, yeah, okay, I think you guys can see that. You can see that there's still green here, and then you can almost see like streaks to what actually. Oh, okay, that's weird. Hey, good call. Running that. So here you can see a little bit better. So there's green here, and then there's like streaky patterns. So it isn't a perfect selection. Okay. But I could start expanding this mask a little bit so that I'm focused at targeting more green areas. And then as I toggle it off and on, you can see it's doing a lot to bring back the white balance.
Expanding that means, is there a key that you can hold that stops the whole circle from going in and out? While you're playing with the shape of the mask, with the shape where your saturation, where your points are, where your color points are.
You mean like as I'm adjusting this to stop the circle from moving?
Go grab the other one.
Uh-huh.
Now look at the circles. The whole circles, changing the saturation on the entire shot.
Yep.
Is there a way to control that so you can just move it and change the colors you're selecting, but not change the saturation? You know what I mean?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Again, this isn't a tool that I use super often, but if we set this, yeah, if you reset this, which with this and same thing with curves, you just double tap on any of those spots and it'll reset it. So we could go in here if you don't want to be doing that. Set this here, set another couple extra out here, adjust this down, then start moving this over here. So you could do that as an alternative. It's not the best way. Yeah, the reason I don't really use this one too often, it can be a really handy tool if you're pressed on a job, you have to get it done, and you just want to do it quick. This could be great, but you can do more accurate selections with HSL secondaries, which we'll get into pretty soon. So we'll clear that, close this, go over here to color wheels. So color wheels are yet another way to change your exposure values. I'll start explaining a little bit of some differences and which ones that I personally use soon, because I know that I'm throwing a lot of different ways of throwing exposure at you. Go ahead.
It seems like a lot of these methods, they kind of duplicate each other.
Sort of.
Yeah.
They're all different. They're similar but different. Yeah, they are all different in how they function.
One you just recommend over all the others.
No. They're all different. Yeah. I highly recommend that you just play with all of them and just kind of get familiar with how they all work, because they're all different. There's pros and cons to all of them. Now, as far as adjusting exposure values, what I use the most and which I do the majority of my exposure changes with are these color wheels. Especially if you want to eventually move on to Resolve and start using that, you're going to be much better off familiarizing yourself with color wheels here, because it'll translate better to that. But this is what I generally will stick to. But when I'm going in color grading and color correcting a shot, I'll go color wheels first. I might go to basic correction, and I might have curves on it too. So I could be adjusting the shadows, midtones, and highlights color wheels. I could have an S curve on there, and I could go over here to be bringing my whites down to recover those highlights. Maybe I'll be adjusting my blacks a little bit. Maybe I'll be adding a little bit of saturation. Maybe I'll be changing the temperature and tint controls. Like, you can use all of it, and they all function slightly different, which is complicated. This means that there's so many different ways to adjust exposure, and they all work differently.
Adjust specific things maybe with a particular tool that
Mhm.
other tools can't get to.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so like for instance, I like the black slider a lot. because it just focuses on just those darkest parts. So maybe I like the exposure of my shot, and it's just those blacks, or the darkest blacks are not quite where I want them to be. And I just hop over here to blacks so I can get a quick isolation on them to bring them down or bring them up to wherever I want them to be. So if we go over here to color wheels, it's pretty straightforward. You've got 2 controls per section. So you've got this slider, and then you've got the wheel. So the slider is what adjusts the luminance values of whatever you're isolating. So here we've got highlights. Start bringing highlights down, and you'll see that the highlights here are doing the same thing that the white slider does or a similar thing to what the white slider was doing with basic correction, where it is pulling back those highlights that are getting clipped out. So that's another great tool that you can use to be able to bring back those highlights. So like I just went and unchecked the clamp signal. You can go over here to the highlight slider, and you can see the whole thing coming on down there. So that's great. You can recover all those overbrights that your camera just was trying to throw away. Midtones, pretty straightforward. It focuses on the midtones of the shot. And then shadows, the shadows. And you can see it's pretty isolated on the shadows, or the shadows controller fairly well isolates the shadows, but it does still affect everything else. You can see skin tones adjusting, the wood in the background's adjusting. If you look into the waveform, you can even see some of those, the like darker highlights are being pulled down just a little bit. So these 3 tools kind of, they overlap each other, which is nice in a lot of ways to just kind of keep you safe without, getting controls that are too isolated on anything. Then the color wheels, the way those do is those add a specific color, whatever color you select, to that section. So if I go over here, this is kind of like if we go back to the creative panel where you have the shadow tint and highlight tint. It's a little bit, you can do similar things here too. These are basically tint controls, except now you have midtones. And so I could go over here and I could start pushing all my highlights up there, and then I can push my shadows to blue or to green or to whatever I want to add. What's that? Yeah, that's kind of like what I was mentioning a second ago. That all 3 of these tools, the shadows, midtones, and highlights wheels and sliders, the areas that they hit all overlap to a certain degree, but they're primarily focused on one section or another. So as you're adjusting, like, let's move this over here. That's what that shot looks like when I push the shadows to blue. And that's what it looks like as I push highlights to blue. Actually, let's do it like this. So that's shadows. Oh, there we go. That's highlights. And you can see it's a little bit different. So as I go to shadows, for skin tones, they're obviously blue, but they're not as blue as they are at the highlight, because her skin tones are about 70 IRE. They're a lot brighter values than the shadows. So the highlight control is hitting that harder. So all those tools, they do overlap each other to a degree, but they have different focuses on where they're trying to affect things. Oh, okay. Sorry for the confusion. And then that's midtones. Occasionally I do use these as color correction tools. It varies. It definitely varies. I'm going to skip over HSL secondary just because that's a really big section, and that's something I'm going to be primarily focusing on through the rest of this to be able to get clean white balances. And just hop over to vignette. Vignette's pretty straightforward. It adds a quick and dirty way to add a vignette, and you can adjust it to all the values of whatever you want to, whatever you want to do for that. All right, now going to HSL secondary. Oh, click, thank you.
Do you mainly do this basically for your own satisfaction of the job, or is actually demand?
Oh yeah, no, you have to do this. You can't get accurate white balances without doing stuff like this, especially depending on the footage that you get. Like, it doesn't matter how nice the footage is, it's still going to get corrected. I mean, if you think of your favorite movie, whatever movie you think is most beautiful, it's all been color graded. That's not as it came through in camera. Every single shot that you're watching has been heavily modified. Anything that you look at that you think looks nice, it's all color graded. So these are just some, the movies like that, they're going to be color graded and probably Resolve. And Lumetri doesn't have the same amount of controls as Resolve. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't ever expect, or I guess as me as a colorist, when I get footage, and it's like I have clients tell me all the time, like, it looks beautiful in camera, and I look at it and I see, no, it's not. Maybe the shadows need to come down. Maybe you need more contrast. Maybe the shot's a little bit underexposed, but I need to isolate the skin tones in order to just brighten those skin tones up. Maybe a shot like this, there's white balance issues where the fume hood is one white balance, the window has another white balance, and then there's another white balance inside of the room. So yeah, no, everything gets heavily tweaked.
So with that said, how much of using a gray card or a white card before you do capture the footage, how much is that helping you out?
A lot, yeah. Sticking a white card or gray card, a good accurate one,
is to use that gray card or the white card?
Yeah, it can be super helpful, especially like, I mean, for me, when I shot all this stuff in this lab, and I've got a few different clips to go through different parts of this this whole series of videos that I shot, if my computer will pull them up. When I shot all of these, I had a white card that I pointed my camera at to do an auto white balance on my camera, so that I could get things to be close to there. And like that helps too, to if you have a white card when you're shooting, especially when you're shooting in environments where you don't have full control over the color, that's helpful to use your camera to use an auto white, or to do a white balance on that white card. But then to also keep that in the frame for when you start rolling. So then at the beginning of this, then instead of you having to mess around with trying to white balance things, you can just go over here to basic correction, get your white balance selector, say this is a white card, click that, and you've got a pretty good white balance.
Okay.
I would probably still tweak it from there, but yeah.
So even with that, what you just outlined, you're still going to go in and do major color correction, even?
I don't know if I'd say major. It depends on the shot. This shot needs major color correction, yes. There's a lot of issues going on with this shot.
Let me just say, because always shoot your shit well the first time.
Yes.
Don't think you can just go in there and shoot whatever
Yes,
you want
yes,
and
yes,
say,
yes.
Nate will fix it because it's color corrected. How hard is that? No, always shoot it right, because color is somewhat subjective in that there's color correction where you're trying to make it look as natural as it should with whites and skin tones, right? Then there's color grading where you want to put those effects on it. Now I want to make it look kind of funky. And so it's kind of it's a combination of those things, right? Of what you want. And so this shot needs some correction because it's not right. It's been washed out, it went to blacks, you want to bring back your stuff. So he's going to correct it, but then you might, okay, this is correct, but your correct might not be what Sasha's correct is. I think Nate likes his skin tones different than I like my skin tones. It doesn't make it wrong or right, it's just where you want your skin tones, right? So shoot it the way you want it, and then adjust it, but always shoot it right. And shoot that white card, shoot that gray stuff. This is going to help you a lot to know where you think that needs to be. And then you go from this, and then this is where this comes in.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's critically important. This isn't a replacement for having to white balance on set. You have to white balance on set. You have to get it as close as you possibly can in camera. Then you start adjusting things that need to be adjusted in post-production.
And since we're on the topic, I'm familiar with using a gray card for color correction and photography. And I don't have that much experience with video, especially with the color correction. But I have heard that they do not use a gray card in video. They specifically use a white card, and I've never understood why. Can anybody help me with that?
I spent years as a photographer, and we learned how to plot film curves from the very beginning. Then we learned we use gray cards, we use Macbeth charts, which is now called X-Rite, and so you wanted to be able to make an exposure that was accurate. One of the things we found out early on is that you needed to know what the color was that you were shooting, and you needed to understand that. So you have to have a pretty good color meter to do that, which is actually a pretty expensive item. And I think with video, people you get these little passport. X-Rite makes a little thing called a passport, and instead of a gray card, it has a chart on it. What is it? It has three tones: gray, white, black. And when you bring that up on the on the scopes, you can find out, you can see where if the color was going to be perfect, if you were in a perfectly color balanced lighting situation, right? A perfectly balanced color lighting situation, which means like the light from out the windows, you would have had big gels, and you would have to gel those windows, and you would have to change the bulbs and all the fluorescent bulbs in the room. You would have to change them out to a balanced bulb, and that matched your source for your key light, which is unlikely to happen in a corporate situation. You know, that's more like feature, you know, level lighting. So, do you have that with the 3 colors instead of all those colors?
So it's right there.
Yeah.
Oh, this guy.
So
Oh, the new
there's
one. Yeah, this is the
4.
new. That's right.
So when
Actually,
you
just got
get
this
to
one.
those 3 and you put it on the, what is it going to be, the RGB monitor or the RGB
Or the
scope.
RGB waveform.
Yeah, waveform, you can line up as you're adjusting the color balance on your wheels, or you know, he's triangulating his color balance through 3 or 4 different tools, but as you triangulate that color balance, all those waveforms are going to line up in RGB, right?
Right.
But the thing that you need, what they're saying is most people, like in photography, once I realized it wasn't about accurate color, it was about what looked bitchy.
Yeah.
It was all about what looked bitchy.
Mm-hmm.
It was not about, you know, I mean, there was an occasional time for certain clients, like Target would be like, well, the butterscotch doesn't look like butterscotch. It's kind of orangey. Okay, great. Seriously? They were crazy about having accurate colors on certain things. Then on most things, they just want, you know, most color, if you go to features, color is wacko. But it's bitchy.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, it's, and the colorists, I mean, they really change. The people, when they shoot it, they're laying down clean tracks, just a clean exposure, so that the colorists have a chance. And the director probably has somebody there helping him while they're shooting it in a director's monitor, applying the look he's going for, so they know they can get it. But
that's actually what I'll be doing this Saturday for a video. DIT.
Yeah, you're going to DIT?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you everyone. All great points. I mean, yeah, for video I usually use a white card, but for the white balance selector tool here, you can hit on something gray as long as you know that gray is accurate. But yeah, either way. Yeah. So going to HSL secondaries, who here works with green screens? Okay, so you can think of an HSL secondary is like keying footage. That's what it is. It keys footage. But when you're using something like Ultra Key to key out your green screen, you're focusing just on green, and you'll think of you're trying to get rid of greens. What you can do with this HSL secondary is you get to pick specific ranges of video, and you get to adjust those to however you want to adjust them. So, and you can adjust them to be able to like narrow things down. You have HSL, hue, saturation, and luminance. So you get to, let's say I want to get some skin tones. There's a couple different ways you can do that. There's a whole manual process, which I'll go over in a second. Then there's these 3 eyedropper tools. You get this first. Oh, there we go. Get this first one, and I'll start maybe I'll select it here.
You drag around, you select.
Not with that one. That one just gets the first one, and then there's the plus and minus. So I can go over here to plus, and then I can start dragging that around. Now to be able to see what you're selecting right now, because right now this is showing you ranges on these little graphs. To be able to see specifically what you're checking or what you're selecting, you go to this little box and check it. And then you have a few different viewer modes. Usually this is what I keep it on, color gray, but you can do color black, white black. So what this is the gray part or the black part, both of these, are values you're not selecting, so you don't have to worry about those. The color part is like what you see here. Everything that is not gray is the part of the image that I'm currently actively selecting. And so if I were to start going and adjusting things, like that super blue as I turn this off, you can see it's only on the specific areas that I selected with this tool. Let's turn this back on. So I had my initial thing set here. I'm realizing, let's say I want to isolate those skin tones, and I'm missing some information here up here at forehead. I'll get this little plus dropper, and there we go. Now it's all coming in. But then you can see as I'm selecting a lot more and really trying to fine tooth everything in, the software is trying to roughly rough it out and it's making guesstimations off of like what you want to select and how best to select it. So it's not a perfect tool. I mean, I could go back here, get the minus, and I don't want the blue, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I don't want purple, but then, well, now I'm losing half of her face, and I've got all this extra stuff, so now that's a pretty crappy selection. So for myself, I do a fairly manual process. So say I want to select this fume hub like I was showing previously in the creative tab, or not the creative, the curves tab. I know by looking at it, it's a little bit green and it's a little bit yellow. And if I want to select that, I'll probably start with the yellows. And I'm going to check this box so that I know what I'm selecting. And you can see I've already got a pretty decent selection. Got a lot of stuff over there, but I've got a lot of excess stuff. So I've got these this wood panels down here. I've got some skin tones. So this is more green. This is more like yellow, red stuff. So I'm going to take this hue slider, and I'm going to start pushing it back this way. And you can see now I'm not selecting the skin tones. I'm not selecting the wood backdrop, and I'm actually getting more of the fume hood because some of that stuff's pretty green and almost even getting into cyan. So, but it's still not like I can't, with the controls that I have right now, I can't fully select that stuff. I can't, as I'm trying to get to the cyan stuff over here, then I'm losing some more green stuff up here. So I'll move this back, and the way I'm moving this is just grab and move it around. The way I adjust this is you can see there's two triangles. This top triangle adjusts this. It's a little bit hard to. Oh, it's right there. It's right behind me. This top triangle adjusts the lighter part of the bar. The bottom triangle adjusts this darker kind of triangular area on the side of here. So if I want to make this bigger, a bigger selection here, then I can just start widening this out. If this adjusts the roll-off of like here, I have a very hard selection. It's only selecting those specific areas that I isolated. But that looks kind of awkward. It's pretty harsh. So then I can take this and just kind of smooth it out. Smooth it out a little bit. It's probably a little bit more than I want to do. I'll start bringing it back this way. Now, this isn't the perfect tool. It's a little bit awkward. I'm having to get some of the trees in the background, but I don't really care that much about the trees. I would rather have the white balance of the trees be a little bit off in order to correct this a little bit better, the fume hood a little better. So it's not a perfect tool. Next is saturation. Usually I'll probably drop down to luminance values first, because I'm not too concerned about a lot of these black areas. Like technically the black areas on here don't have a correct white balance. It's just not as noticeable as the brighter areas. So I'll check this back up. I'll start bringing those out, just so that then I'm not selecting less areas that I don't want to hit. And then I'll feather that a little bit. It's very spotty. This is rarely going to get you a perfect selection. It's just I'll go over in a second how to get a little bit cleaner selection. Then the saturation slider here, that lets you target areas of specific saturation. So maybe there's the thing that you're trying to isolate, it doesn't have a lot of saturation in it. Maybe you want to add saturation, or just because of what it is, you want to make it brighter or darker or whatever. Or you only want to target areas that have a lot of saturation, because maybe there's one part of your shot, maybe you have a red balloon in your shot, and that red balloon, for whatever reason, is super damn red, so much more saturated than the rest of your shot. You can use this, just select the saturated areas, and bring back the saturation to get balancing up. So I only want to hit the areas that have a lot of green right now. So I'm going to pull this over so that I'm not targeting areas with high saturation, except that that's a little bit tricky. It's not, as I was saying before, this isn't a perfect science. You usually don't get perfect selections. But that might be good enough. One thing to keep in mind with this HSL secondary is that the amount of control that you're going to be able to have to get good keys on stuff depends entirely on the quality of your footage. So if you shot something with an iPhone that's 8-bit 420, you're not going to be able to get a good selection of stuff unless whatever you're wanting to select is just so different than everything else in your shot. Like getting a selection like this on footage would be incredibly, on like an iPhone, would be incredibly difficult because it's 8-bit 420 footage. This also makes a difference for if you are shooting 1080 or 4K. If it's 4K, there's just more pixels, so there's just more information to select. This footage, it was shot with an FS7 and 422 10-bit, so it's pretty decent. There's a pretty decent amount of color information there. If this footage was raw, so 444 12-bit, then I would be able to get a significantly better selection. But yeah, keep that in mind. Something with like a C100, it's going to be a lot harder to get really accurate selections on stuff, and you just won't be able to move things around as much as you want to, as compared to something like an FS7 shooting 10-bit 422. I can say that from experience because I shot with a C100 for 3 years in pretty poor situations. Next two controls down here: denoise, blur. So denoise, you can see like up here, all this noise up here. It kind of almost just looks like film noise or anything like that. Denoise will start attempting to clean things up. So I'll make this a little bigger. Come on. That's before, after, before, after. Yeah, well, if you're looking in the fume hood, you can see some. It's in this shot. It's not making a huge difference. Oh, yeah, it's actually not doing as much as I thought it would up there. But you can see, like in here, it's cleaning things up a little bit, like right up there. It like gets a little bit better. It's not a perfect tool, but it helps you just kind of get something a little bit cleaner. Then from here, you've got your blur controls, and this is something that you'll almost always have to do. I mean, yeah, blurs your selection so you get a nice cleaner thing. Like even if I'm shooting, or even if I'm working on footage that's raw footage that's 10-bit 444 8K red footage, I'm not getting perfect selections on stuff even then. You just very rarely get perfect selections. You have to get as best of a selection as you can. Then you start denoising and blurring to just try to smooth things out. Actually, before I do that, let me show you what happens why you don't want to, or why you do want to blur. What happens when you don't blur? I'm going to keep this. Actually, no, we'll do this. I'm going to just really harshly push these things, just super blue, just so you can get an idea. Let's go even further. Really, really, really heavy-handed. See where I'm going. I've got this on full playback. It's not going to play back I'm on a laptop, so I'm just going to have to go frame by frame. Make this full screen. You can see, like, if you're looking up at the top of that fume hood, the selections are changing with every single frame. So, actually, just playing back. That's awful. You don't want to like try to get a selection on something, and then you see all this whole pixely weird grain thing happen going. Yeah, she even hates this. Like, what the fuck's going on? So that's why blur is important. So let's go. I don't know why it's doing. What's that? Yeah, it'll be a little bit nicer. So check this box back on. I'm gonna start blurring things out. And I'm going to give it a pretty heavy blur just because there's a lot of things going on. Now I'm going to play this back again with this selection on frame only. You can only see what's affected. And now this isn't as bad. It's still a little flickery. It's not ideal. I might want to spend some more time to get a slightly better HSL selection so that that's not happening as much. But right now, I'm just kind of leave it as is, because I've been keeping you guys for like an hour already. So when you want to start affecting things, these are all your controls here. By default, this is how it's going to show up. You see one wheel that's unlabeled. This unlabeled wheel is your midtones. It's not a general wheel over everything. It's midtones. It just doesn't tell you that. You can see that here. I'm going to take that. I'm going to push this super blue. Then you click this. There's these 3 circles right here. That gives you your 3 wheels. You can see that selection I did was just on the midtone wheel. So that's just something to keep in mind. Sometimes you can be on the one wheel and just mess around with stuff there. In this case, that's going to be just fine for what I want to do. But this is how you get to your specific shadows and highlights wheels as well. And then you've got your temperature, tint, contrast, sharpen, saturation controls as well if you want to start adding all those in. In this case, I'm just going to stick with midtones because the values of these, I mean, it's around midtones, it's around highlights, but again, all these controls overlap, so I'm not too worried about that. So this has got a lot of green in here, and I want to balance that out. So I'm going to start pushing this pink. That pink's the opposite of green. Oh, now it's getting a little bit tricky. You don't want to start going too far. As you can, it's a little bit hard to see. As I'm starting to push things, you can see those pipes? They're starting to get pink. So we don't want pink, purple pipes. Some of the white balance in here is getting better, but let's go ahead and just reset this. To do so, you just double click. There you go. Let's start pushing this back again, slowly. With all of these things, do it slowly. Just move things slowly. You don't want to be too heavy-handed. And I think that's going to be as far as I can push things in this instance without going too heavy-handed. Because now pipes, I know it's hard to see there, those pipes and some of the shadows beneath them are getting too pink. So this is where we're at so far. That was before. That's after. Make that full screen. Before. After. So you can see that now that fume hood isn't as green. The white balance is closer to the rest of the white balance in the room, but it's still not perfect. And this is why you need multiple Lumetri layers, because you can only do one HSL secondary key per Lumetri layer. So if I could only have one Lumetri layer, then that sucks. Like I can't keep focusing on keying that fume hood out, and it might need 4 or 5 selections to get that green balanced out. I can't focus on white balance in the room. Like maybe I want to focus on the white balance on the trees in the background because the white balance of them is daylight, which is cooler than everything else, and I want to balance that out. Generally, I wouldn't care about something like that, but if you want to do it, go ahead.
What shortcut are you using when you control screen turning the
Oh, tilde. So it's above the tab key and to the left of the 1 key. So you can go on any window and tilde to make it full screen.
No, but to turn the effect on when you are.
Oh, that one. Oh, that was a little thing that I added. So I'm getting confused 2 things. There's a couple ways that I'm doing that. Right here, I was doing it with this little check mark. So here in the Lumetri control panel, on each section in it, each tab in it, there's a little check mark. So you can click the check mark to turn it off and on. If you want to turn off everything in that instance of Lumetri, you go over here to Effect Controls, and you've got your Lumetri color here. So you can just click the FX off and on. And just as a note, you have all of these controls that you have in the Lumetri color panel in the effects control panel as well. It's not quite laid out as well as it is in the Lumetri color panel, but you've got it all there, and that gets important for when you have multiple Lumetri stacks because the Lumetri color panel only lets you affect the lowest Lumetri color layer. So whatever's on the bottom of this stack is what is being affected here. So sometimes maybe you have 5 layers of Lumetri, and then you realize on the first one, your initial pass and everything, the white balance wasn't quite where you wanted it to be. Well, then you have to go over here to effects controls to adjust that. And I can show you that a little bit more later.
The parameters keyable?
Which parameters?
Like everything that you affect, you place keyframes in it.
Oh, yeah. These are all keyable. So
Is the opacity of the effect adjustable on that? So you could say, oh, it's kind of a little heavy-handed. I want to take it down to 80%. Can you do it over on the effect controls?
No, you just not in this case. No, you just have to get it to be where you want it to be. Yeah. Unfortunately, that would be nice if Lumetri itself had a just general opacity, so that for on a specific Lumetri layer, you could adjust that opacity, but not as opacity. Yeah. Resolve does a lot of things much more clearly.
Which leads me to the question that you guys believe in edit resolve now, doesn't it? Because it started the editor is getting pretty good.
It is getting pretty good. I was quite impressed actually.
It's simple stuff. It's really good actually.
Yeah, it's very different from Premiere Pro. The way you use everything is very different, but yeah, I've been kind of liking it. Although don't worry, Mark, we're not switching.
For raw.
Craig would never let that fly. I don't think any of it. I think if I tried to tell you guys we need to switch to Resolve, you'd all fire me.
You need really compelling reasons for Resolve to take over Premiere and Final Cut.
Yeah.
Really compelling reasons.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, generally for me, when I'm using Resolve, like say I'm going to grade a film, they won't have edited it in Resolve. They'll have edited it in Final Cut or Premiere, and then they can send their project file to me, and I can still get to it. So, okay. I have to apologize a little bit. This is taking longer than I expected it to. How long do these meetings normally go for? Till now?
Till 9.
Till 9? All right. Well, I've got 18 minutes left.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, within a timeline, say you want to keep the color the same part of it and cut other parts of it. You just leave your original footage in, and then you just colorize, then color correct the footage that you're working on. Is that how it works? I mean, you can just keep it all this. It'll normally when you do the color correction, it'll go through the whole timeline.
Oh, no, it doesn't go through the whole time. It goes for the clip that you're selected. I mean, you could put an adjustment layer above your entire timeline, and you can start putting effects on there, but just don't do that.
Is there a way to copy the clips from one? How do you copy from one clip to the next?
Very good question. So there's a couple ways you can do that. One is like, yeah, I mean, that can be a good idea to, you work on, let's say you have 5 B-roll shots that were all in the same lighting environment. They all look relatively similar to each other. They're all exposed the same lights, all that stuff. You can copy and paste all of your Lumetri settings from one shot to the next, so you don't have to redo everything every single time. You'll still want to do minor tweaks, to each clip because they're all going to be a little bit different. But as far as copying effects, copying Lumetri layers, there's a couple ways to do it. If you have one Lumetri layer that you're working with, then it's really simple. You just select it over in the effects control, Command-C, or you can right-click and copy. Go to the next clip, Command-V to paste it. So in this case, that's not actually doing much. Well, you can't really see it. Here, let me make it a little more obvious for you. Let's go over here, push this super blue, beautiful white balance. We'll go over to this clip, and now you can see that get applied. You'll know it's there because you'll see the Lumetri stack in the effects panel for that clip that you have selected. You'll also see, it's a little bit hard to see. No, that's not helping. But if you look at the little FX thing on here, it just turned purple in your timeline as compared to like this clip, which has nothing on it and it's gray. So you can do that. However, if you have multiple Lumetri layers, copying them over one at a time would be insane. I can tell you from experience, it's insane. This was a clip that I showed you before with 11 or 12 Lumetri layers on there. That's a pain in the ass to do. So what you can do in that case, when you have multiple Lumetri layers, is you go select your clip in the timeline itself, Control-V the clip. So you're copying just the whole clip as if you're going to paste it in the timeline. Or Control-Z, thank you. You're copying the whole clip as if you're going to paste it in the timeline. You select the clip that you want to go to, and if you're on Windows, I believe it's Control-Alt-V. Yeah, it's Control-Alt-V, not just Control-V. Control-V. That's just going to paste the whole clip, which we don't want to do in this case. We just want to copy the effects over. So Control-Alt-V takes you to this paste attributes window. So here you got to go through and select all the attributes that you want to go over. So I don't want to do motion, don't want to do opacity, don't want to change the time remapping, don't want to put ultra key on there. I just want to put all these millions of Lumetri color stacks on there. Click OK. And this might take a little while. Oh, did it actually? Oh no, that's right. I have this little button here to turn things off. So there we go. There's the whole effect off. All right, that's now been applied. Before, after. If you want to go delete a whole bunch of stacks off of each other, you can do a similar process. That instead of this window, the paste attributes, there's remove attributes. Because I mean, you could go through and individually delete everything, but that's a pain in the ass to do. You can also just go to Edit, Remove Attributes, and then it just groups them all together. But then you can. That's a quick way to delete everything in one pass. shoot, yeah, we got 15 minutes left. I was hoping to get in a little more to show you some quick practical applications of all this stuff. Just showing you all the controls. It would be nice to see some more stuff. So in this, let's see, which one do we want to go with? Let's go with, you know, I'm actually going to stick with this one because there's a lot of white balance issues here. Go back to the beginning of this clip. I'm going to, over here in the effects control panel, I'm just going to reset everything. I don't know if I have anything going on, but oh, yes I did. So that's just gone. One other quick tip. There's all these controls down here. You can play and fast forward, set keyframes and markers and stuff. They're not keyframes, but in and out and markers and stuff. I have this one thing called the global FX mute. You can find it by clicking the plus button, and then it's not in there because I already moved it down. But then you can take stuff from here and you can move it down into that.
It's that.
Yeah, it's already down here. You can move stuff down if you want to. So I like that. What that does is that just takes all of the effects that you actively have on that clip and it turns them all off. So sometimes it's kind of nice to just see, maybe you have 6 Lumetri layers on there. You don't want to individually go through and hit the FX button on all of them. It just does everything in one quick pass. And that's kind of nice. It does do everything. So like in this case, the footage was green screened. So that's taken off the green screen as well. But it can be pretty handy. So with this one, I'm pulling up Lumetri scopes. Things that I'm noticing about this clip. I've got highlights clipped. I know this footage has the overbrights in it. So I'm going to first go to, because I know that this camera has overbrights and things are clipped out, I'm going to use the whites control because it's more or less focused on those. And I'm going to start, it would be good if I unmuted. I'm going to start bringing this back. So this way I have the most dynamic range that I can get out of the camera. And that's nice. I like that. Next I'm going to go down to my color wheels and I'm going to start bringing my shadows down. Kind of rule of thumb in this day and age anyways is assuming you're not sending things to broadcast. This doesn't apply to broadcast. But if you're not going to broadcast your footage on TV, then it's generally recommended to try to bring your black levels down to around 0. There isn't like a perfect thing where it has to be at 0, it has to be at 5 or anything like that. If we were in broadcast land, it'd be a little different. But we'll just bring it down to what looks nice. Because if you're delivering to the web, you've got more color space there, and you've got higher ranges of exposure, so you can deal with more there. So those black levels are a little bit better. The whole shot feels a little bit flat to me. I'm going to play with bringing midtones down, but I'm not happy with how that's going, so I'm going to bring it back up. I think I'm going to go to curves and apply that S curve that I was mentioning earlier. Because I don't want to mess with the skin tones too much, but I do want to have a little bit more contrast in the shot. So I'm going to bring this, how do I want to do this? I'm going to down here a little bit, and bring this up. So this is giving me a little bit more contrast in the shot, but making sure that the skin tones still look nice. So, wow, this projector is not the best projector. But that adds a little bit, we got a little bit more contrast in the shot without too much. Again, like I was mentioning earlier, curves adjust saturation as well as luminance values, so just don't be too heavy-handed with those. For the white balance, that one's a little bit tricky, but in this case, I'm going to take the white balance tool. I'm going to drop it. This looks like it's supposed to be pretty white. I'll drop that there. Let's see what that did. You know, that feels a little bit warm to me. So I'm going to dial that back a bit and add in just a... no, I'll keep that about there. Now, it's a little bit hard to tell where my skin tones are falling, and that's pretty important to have skin tones that look nice. So I'm going to go over here to my effects control panel. I'm going to go to the opacity, and I'm going to make a mask. And I'm going to just select her skin tones because I want to be able to look in the scopes and see where her skin tones are falling. And right now I can't see where her skin tones are falling because there's just too much shit going on. So I'll go over here, and this is not perfect. I'm actually going to avoid this area just because we got a lot of daylight coming in there, and that's not what I'm wanting to see. So we got a rough mask on her. Go to our Lumetri scopes, and now you can see those isolated. So I see one good thing going on so far, and that is that when we look over here on the vector scope, there's one thing that I haven't mentioned yet. You see this X pattern. What the X pattern is there's this line here, and as I adjust temperature, you'll see that the footage moves up and almost up perfectly up and down that line. Not quite, but it's pretty close to that line. It's not quite the same with tint. It's kind of roughly similar, but not quite the same. This line here is not something, the Q line is not something that you guys will ever need to be worried about. But this one, it's not showing up, but it's negative I. Or no, I is up here. This side specifically is really important. This line is ideally where skin tones should fall, roughly. That's not a perfect science. Your skin tones don't have to fall exactly on that line, and if they're not exactly on that line, it doesn't mean that your footage is bad. But it gives you a rough idea of where you want your skin tones to fall. So like heat right now, my skin tones are pretty good as far as like tint-wise. Oh, sorry, that's what I mean. As far as you don't want it to be too far to the right side of the line or too far to the left side of the line. As far as this is just for controlling tint. For controlling your tint, you want your skin tones to roughly fall on that line. Again, this isn't a perfect science. You just keep it. It's just a general good guide, unless you're getting into film where you're color grading a specific look. You just want balanced skin tones. So I'm seeing that those are pretty decent. I'll leave that there. I'm going to check that back off. So my skin tones are good enough for this. I'm relatively happy with the exposure of the shot, as happy as I can be considering all the issues with this shot and having almost no light control over anything. But there's lots of white balance issues. So I'm going to go over here to HSL secondaries, get yellow, bring this in, expand that out, cut off skin tones. Yeah, I don't want any skin tones here. Let's make that a little bit wider. Okay, I can't actually. It will affect that a little bit. Bring this out. Bring this out again. Blur this up a lot. Start balancing that out. Then go to effect controls. I'm going to select the clip or the effect. Control Z to copy it. Paste it. Now this is pasting everything I did. I don't want to duplicate everything, so paste it, undo everything, and then now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to keep sitting here. This gets easier after the second pass, and I'll show you why in just a second. So let's go over here. Oh, it's a little bit too wide. Now I'm starting to get into her jacket a bit. Okay. Feather that guy in. Don't want to hit all those black areas. And you know what? This is getting a little bit tricky. So I'm realizing that I have the whites back here selected. And I don't want to be messing up those whites. They're supposed to be white. I don't want to screw with those. So now I'm not selecting the blacks or the whites. Dial it in a little bit more. Blur that out. Uncheck it. And now I can start pushing things more. And this is I'm just doing based off of a site. You can kind of see where things are going. I mean, you can get a rough idea in scopes, like if you're looking over on the left side of the scopes. You know, let me just switch up this off vector scope real quick so you can see the waveform nice and big. So we're looking this range right here. I know there's a lot of colors in there, but that's what you're going to see start being moved for the most part, because that's the section that's selected. Now, right now, there's just a ton of color going on in there. As I put this effect on, you can see something's happening where those color layers are kind of starting to come back together. As they start coming together, that means that we're getting closer to being no saturation, which in this case is good. It's supposed to be the inside of the fume is white. So for me, I want this all color corrected. So I wanted it to be a little bit closer to white, and now it's a little bit closer to white. Like if you look right here, that section, as I toggle this on and off, a bunch of color there, it's a little bit closer to white. It's not perfect, but it's a little bit closer. In fact, I actually might make this a little bit more blue because I want it to feel more, a little more like clean, sterile, kind of blue a little bit does that. So now that I have this Lumetri layer that only has an HSL secondary layer in it, nothing else, I can Command C, copy paste it, and it's already roughly doing what I want it to do because I already set up a layer to be able to do that. And then now in this case, let's make this full screen. Here's this shot before we did anything. Or sorry, there it is before we did anything. And there it is after we corrected it. So now it's got a little bit of a cleaner contrast. We've got values closer to 0 IRA, which will look, well, that's the look that I want for this anyways. The theme HUD's now cleaned up, so relatively cleaned up. It's not a perfect white, but in the real world, things are very rarely perfectly white. So if I were to go in there and get a super accurate selection on there and completely desaturate it, then it was just pure gray, that would just look fake. So this just roughly gets it about there. And we have a much nicer looking image. And then if I go to playback, it doesn't really play back very well, but you can see I'm not running into any keying issues. Oh, but I do see another issue now. You can see that her hair, the front of her, the front or the part of her hair on towards the left side of frame is very green because these lights are green. The other side isn't. So now I need to get specific isolations on there as well. So I'm going to go over here to Lumetri and get another Lumetri layer. Go over here. You know, I'm just going to reset this to play it safe. Let's go to green. Let's bring this over until I start getting her hair. Sometimes you want to toggle this on and off to kind of make sure you're selecting everything correctly. Now I don't want to get... You know what? That's interesting. I was a little bit nervous about seeing all this stuff here, but it looks like there actually, and I know it's hard to see on the projector, but it looks like there actually is a little bit of green in there. Thank you. Save. Go away, please. Now I don't want to be selecting all this stuff in the theme HUD now. We've already worked on that. And it has not, the saturation value of that is not super high, so then I can take these control and I can start pulling that out. But now it's starting to get into the hair, so that's going too far. And I don't want to be hitting these highlights over here, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to start cutting out those highlights. And I'm just going to take this as far as I can go until I see it start messing with the hair. That's pretty good. I'll feather that in. Well, that's not bad. Again, you can't really expect to get perfect selections on things. That just doesn't realistically happen. I'm going to blur this out a little bit more. Actually, let's try denoising it a bit. I'll see what this does. That helps clean up some errant stuff here and there. And we'll just start blurring this out. For this one, it's going to need a pretty heavy blur. You can see as I'm toggling back on frames, it's pretty spotty. So it's going to need a heavy blur, unfortunately. We'll turn that off. Let's go over here to the correction. And I could be doing this with the tint controls to push it to pink. But I prefer to use the wheels just because if I start tinting things pink and then I realize I want to adjust the temperature at the same time, I can just do that all within the wheel. I don't have to use two sliders for it, so that's just kind of handy to me. So I'm going to start pushing this pink, and it's going to have to be pushed pretty far, and it's not bad. Let's see. That's not bad. That looks like her hair's matching itself a little bit better. That might be a little bit warm. In fact, I'm noticing, and it's hard to see, but in some of the shadows of her hair, the shadows themselves look a little pink. So I'm actually going to go over here to the shadow controls and put those back to be a little bit green. And move this a little bit back. And then I'll move this a little... Oh, what the hell just happened? Alright, that was weird. Move that a little. Move this a little. It's a little bit of a balancing act, often. Okay. Off and on. Make that full screen. Off and on. and it's not perfect. As I'm looking at this, I still see a little bit of green in her hair, and then other parts of her hair look to me a little bit too magenta because of the effects that I did on them. But I'll take this over that any day. So this is before we did anything to the shot, and now that's the shot after we worked on it, and it's pretty damn different. And like, this is just on the correction side of things. This is not color grading. This is not styling anything. This is just correcting issues within the footage. And sometimes once you start digging into things, it can be amazing how many things you want to change, or how many things that you see are off from what is ideal. Yeah. I wish the dynamic range on this projector was a little higher. That'd be nice. Anyways.
Quick definition between color correction and color grading.
I can give you my definition between color correction and color grading. I don't know if it's a purely scientific thing, but my definition of color correction versus color grading is color correction is, just as it says, you're correcting things. So I'm correcting the colors. So in here, I'm correcting the colors of the fume hood, so I don't have all that excess green in there. I'm correcting the exposure in small degrees. Color grading is a stylistic thing. So you're styling your colors to look a specific way for what you want to do. And yeah, if I were color grading, I would be in Resolve. Yes, you can grade in Premiere, but that's not something that I really work with. I think that about covers it. Oh, one thing I did want to mention briefly. Does anyone here shoot log footage? S-log, C-log? Okay. What do you shoot?
On the Canon,
Oh, okay. So you use C-log? Okay. I'm not super familiar with how C-log works, but with an FS7 shooting S-log, C100 may be similar, may not. You want to overexpose your image by quite a lot. So like for going back to this shot that I showed earlier, this was shot in S-log 3, S-gamma 3. Yeah. If I were to go over here to basic correction thing, and I put on a LUT that, again, this isn't quite the right LUT, but the RA log curve is very similar to the S-log 3 curve. You can see all this stuff is blown out and I can't recover it. And that sucks. Like that's just gone. But if you take the time to really delve deep into color correction and color grading, and you learn how to use Resolve, or if you start to use, you can actually even do things by hand. If I turn this effect off, it's that same shot, I can do this. Oh, damn it. The projector is clipping everything out. This is a terrible example. I could show you on my laptop. Nothing's actually clipped on there. I really should have had the right stuff to be able to hook up to that TV. That would have been helpful. So that's, I know that was a bit of a brief tangent. It's just one thing I wanted to cover for people who do shoot in log. I would generally recommend that you take the time to learn how to be able to color correct the footage manually instead of tossing a correction log, a correction LUT on there. You can just get a significantly better result. And especially if any of you end up shooting with like an FS7, it's a generally noisy camera. You'll get noise in the image. But with this image, because I overexposed it by such a massive degree, if you were to pull up this image on a 4K screen and you pixel peeped the crap out of it, and like I right now this is exported as ProRes 422, so it's a pretty high quality file. You can pixel peep the crap out of it, and you won't find a speck of grain in this shot. I'd be, oh, hello. Well, that screwed up. Go back here. It's just this nice clean image. Although I know in the projector that looks shut off.
To overexpose it.
You're not. You're not. When you're looking at your waveform to expose your shot, you're not pushing it to where things are clipping. You're just pushing it to where when you asked earlier about using a LUT on your field monitor, if you would have used that LUT on your field monitor to expose your shot to get it exposed correctly, then you'd be having more grain than this. So you can, with a LUT on there, that's going to just roughly clip stuff out. And so that's what I mean. So if you had a LUT on there, you'd have to overexpose it based on what you see there.
What if you were shooting wrong?
If you're shooting raw, like you're shooting on like a red camera, then shooting
raw through the FS7.
Oh, I don't know specifically how that raw works. I don't.
And that's DMG.
It's Cinema DMG. I guess it depends on the external recorder that you're using. So if you're using something like a Shogun, then yeah, I believe that would be Cinema DMG.
Obviously, Shogun's too.
Yes, I believe so. And I don't know what I don't have an Odyssey, so I don't know what codec it records in. I mean, something like if you're shooting red raw, in post-production, you can choose what gamma curve and what color space you want. So you can go over to your master controls in the effects panel, and you can go, maybe the person who shot it with in red gamma 4, and you want to see what red log film looks like, you can do that in post-production seamlessly without losing anything. Reds are a little bit different though. They're not like Sony cameras for shooting log. You can't push things in log. You can't overexpose things like you can with an FS7. Yeah, one other thing I wanted to talk about is I'm gonna wrap things up quick. I know it's late and everyone probably wants to get out of here, but I've mentioned several times that Premiere Pro doesn't have as much as Resolve has, and it doesn't, but it has a lot. There is still so much that you can do, and using HSL selections, you have so much power to fix things. It can be astronomical. So, like if you're looking at this shot with the effects turned off, there's a lot of issues here. His skin tones are pink. His shirt, you can see these, yeah, especially on there. On here, it's totally blown out. But what's really going on with this shirt? Let me see if I can. Here, let me see if I can show this better. We'll do it this way. In what's happening in this shot, again, I apologize that it's hard to see on the projector, is that part of his shirt is being clipped, not all of it. And I mean not the entire video signal is being clipped in his shirt. Specifically, only the blue channel, the brightest parts of the blue channel in his shirt are being clipped. The red channel and the green channel are fine. Just the blue channel is clipped, which, that sucks. Like, let's see if I bring down the exposure here. Will you guys be able to see that better? If I check that back on. There we go. What does that look like here? It's really hard to see. But what's going on here is a little bit. If you guys come up with me after this, I can show it a little bit better. In his shirt, part of the blue signal is being clipped. If we go over here to Lumetri scopes, you can see that right here. That's the blue channel, and it's actually, let's go over to RGB parade. This will be easier to show. There's a red, green, and blue. Red, all the brightest parts, they're fine. Green, brightest parts, fine. Blue, that's almost a straight line. That's gone. That information's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And in this case, it's not recoverable. It's just, this is one of the issues with the camera. This was shot Rec 79. This is before we switched to shooting S-Log. That information is gone, and that sucks. However, I was able to grade the footage to get back all the information. And it was through very, not get back all the information, but a good chunk. You can see in the RGB parades, it's a more natural curve to it, just like here with greens or with the reds. Then over here was just a hard line. But that's why I had 11 stacks of Lumetri on there. I did like an initial pass of just the basic temperature and tint and exposure and contrast. Then I went through and I had to isolate the skin tones because they were too magenta, and that screwed things up. It made it so I had multiple stacks of Lumetri. Then I had to have a ton of Lumetri stacks isolating those areas of the shirt where the blue channel was being clipped out to just focus on bringing in more blue. So you can, what you mean to say with that is just there's a lot that you can do with Lumetri. This shot had a lot of issues, but then I can turn it into a nice clean shot it has a good exposure, that doesn't really have the blue channel clipped out anymore, that has accurate skin tones, and it ends up working out pretty good. I think I'll leave it at that. Been keeping you guys for a really, really long time. This is all a very kind of a slow meeting. There's kind of a lot of things to talk about, so I hope that was useful. I hope you guys got some things out of this?
Thank you so much. No, I know. Since I don't